தோன்றுதல் அன்றி திதியிலா தொல்தரணி தோன்றுதல் அன்றி திதியிலா தொல்தரணி தோன்றாமல் தோற்றுவிக்கும் தீமலை தோன்றலே தோன்றாமல் தோற்றுவிக்கும் தீமலை தோன்றலே சத்சங்கம் சார்வோர் சத்சங்கம் சார்வோர் சழக்குள்ளம் சாய்ந்தழிய தத்சங்கத்தான் ஒளியாய்த்தும் தீமலையே தோன்றலே சத்சங்கம் சார்வோர் சழக்குள்ளம் சாய்ந்து அழிய தத்சங்கத்தான் ஒளியாய்த்துன்னு ஒளியாய் தத்சங்கத்தான் ஒளியாய்த்துன்னு
Fiery mountain lord, who, not appearing before our eyes, caused this ancient world as a fleeting appearance to arise, so that the flawed minds of those who join our company may subside and fall and destroyed be, come as the light of self, existing as the one reality.
Om Namo Bhagavate Sri Ramana. So we've done 27 neṟis or disciplines so far from Muruganar's book, Sadharakuriya Sattana Neṟigal, which means disciplines that are essential in the spiritual aspirant. And 28 and neṟi 30 are related, so we'll take that later. We'll first look at neṟi 29 today. Anant, please go ahead.
இதயமே ஈசன் வதியும் கோவில். இதயமே ஈசன் வதியும் கோயில்.
Robert, please.
Heart alone is the temple where the Lord dwells.
So when I saw this neṟi, one of Thai Manavar's quote came to our memory, and Robert did a nice translation of this. So we'll look at this now. Nenjahame koil, ninaive sugandam, anbe manjana neer, puse kollavarai parabarame. Robert, you want to read your translation?
Supreme of all that is supreme, let my heart your temple be. Take my thoughts as heady scent, bathe in the holy water of my love, embrace my puja with your presence.
You want to comment on this, the neṟi, and also on this verse?
Yes. The heart is basically the awareness within which we arise as individual egos and subside. So the heart is really awareness itself. But in order to, if we want to worship or show our devotion to this aspect, then we need to worship it in some externalized form, but the real temple is our own awareness, within which after every thought we subside again and become one with the self.
Right. It's a very profound verse, you know, in the sense that it conveys that the real temple is our own heart. You know, when I first read this many years ago, when I was a school child, it really stuck on me. Then I just immediately memorized it. And you know, years have gone, and it, you know, I never forgot this verse. So this is a very profound verse. This is related to Muruganar's Neṟi. The heart alone is a temple where the Lord dwells. Does anyone else want to make any comment on this?
Yeah, there is a similar verse from Tirumular in Thirumandaram. Ullam Perunkoil, Unudambu Alayam, Vallal Piranarku Vai Gopura Vasal, Tellathelindarku Chivan Shivalingam, Kalla Pulanayandum Kala Mani Vilakke. It's a similar thing, identifying the heart as the temple for Lord Shiva here. And the entire, the body is the actual temple itself. And, you know, so it describes the various aspects of that one.
Yeah, it's a very profound verse. You know, some, I mean, this takes the temple right to your own heart, to your own ullam. It's not the physical heart, it's a ullam. And that is what it's trying to convey here. And I think it really needs to sink into all of us. You know, I know that most of us here in this group are less ritualistic and more towards, you know, true practice. Not that, I mean, there is a big role for rituals, but that at some point, you know, you progress and focus more and more on practice and let this Neṟi, let this principle sink in, that the heart alone is a temple where the Lord dwells. So let's go on to the next two Neṟis, which is 28 and 30. So we'll take these both together, as I mentioned earlier. Anant, you want to read this?
Muttrum Panbatta Thuya Manamudayor Manasakshikkerpa Ozhugal Chala Porundum. We'll read it again. Muttrum Panbatta Thuya Manamudayor Manasakshikkerpa Ozhugal Chala Porundum.
Yeah, and 32.
Idaya Suddham Kadaipadi Tozhuga Karpade Yathartha Yathartha Sadhukkal Karka Vendiya Mudar Padamam. I'll read again. Idaya Suddham Kadaipadi Tozhuga Karpade Yathartha Sadhukkal Karka Vendiya Mudar Padamam.
Yeah. So under the English translations, I'll let Robert go ahead.
It's entirely fitting for those who possess a pure mind that has been thoroughly reformed to conduct themselves taking that mind as their guide.
So these two neṟis are very, very important. So request all to put full attention in these two neṟis. It deals with a lot of common questions that we have. So here, for sake of emphasis, I'll read it again. It is entirely fitting for those who possess a pure mind that has been thoroughly reformed to conduct themselves, taking that mind as their guide. And in Neṟi 30, Muruganar says, go ahead, Robert, please.
The first lesson that true sadhakas must learn is to conduct themselves with a firm resolve to maintain their purity of heart, which in here we take to mean the mind rather than, specifically the mind rather than the heart.
Yeah. So both of these neṟis deal with the purity of mind, the manashuddhi or chitta suddhi. So there are multiple questions arise, and have frequent questions on these, on this particular topic. So we'll discuss this a bit in detail. And actually, we had a discussion a few weeks or maybe a few months ago, and Murugan sent me some really nice probing questions, and I had some email exchanges with him, and some of the discussions are based on that. So we'll look at this here. So first question here is a purification of mind necessary for self-investigation? Right? So I'll let you all just think about it a bit. So is a purification of mind necessary for self-investigation? To answer this question, let's look at the verse from Sri Arunachala Pancharatnam, verse 3, where Bhagavan says, okay, Robert, you want to read that quote?
I, that immaculate mind, which is completely ahamukam, self-facing or self-attentive, investigating where this I itself rises, and thereby clearly knowing the real form of I, one will certainly cease in you, Arunachala, like a river in the ocean. Know this.
Yeah. So by that immaculate mind, which is completely ahamukam or self-facing, and investigating where this I itself rises, and that way clearly knowing the real form of I, one will certainly cease in you, Arunachala, like a river gets lost in the ocean. No. So I'm bringing this verse up because of the word he used here, immaculate mind. The Tamil, he described it, he used the words, Amala maditannal aham idudan yengu elum endru ainde. So the key word that he's using is that we really need an amala madi, or an immaculate mind, to practice self-investigation. So a purified mind is necessary for self-investigation. So the answer is yes. Okay. And here Bhagavan is making it very clear in this verse. The next question that comes up is, why is purification of mind necessary? And Robert brought to my attention the recent discussion of this by Michael, and I also looked at some of Michael's quotes, and we'll bring this here to to discuss this further. So why is purification of mind necessary? Robert, you want to read this, please?
Why is purification of mind, chitta shuddhi, so necessary? The impurities in our mind are our vishaya vasanas, which are our inclinations to tend to and experience phenomena, vishayas, because they are what impel us to face outwards, away from ourselves, and thereby to nourish and sustain ego.
So the impurities in our mind are the Vishaya vasanas, which are inclinations to attend to and experience phenomena. That is all Vishayas. Because they are what impel us to face outwards, away from ourselves, and thereby to nourish and sustain the ego. And go ahead, please.
Therefore, what is called purification of mind is just reduction in the strength of our Vishaya vasanas, so we can go deep in the practice of self-investigation and self-surrender, only to the extent that our mind is purified. This is such a simple and self-evident truth that it should be clear to anyone who has studied Bhagavan's teachings and tried to put them into practice.
So what Michael says here is what is called purification of mind is actually a reduction in the strength of our Vishaya vasanas. That is our tendency to go outwards, so that we can go deep in the practice of self-investigation and self-surrender. So that answers the question why this purification of mind or chitta should be necessary. So then now immediately, let's not get discouraged here. So the question here is, the next question that comes up, so do we need to wait till complete purification of mind is achieved before starting on the path of self-investigation? Right? So that's what everybody would start wondering, because sometimes people tell me, no, well, not everybody is ready. They have to have achieved purification of mind before they start on self-investigation. And that's a valid question. So let's look at the answer here. We don't need to wait till complete purification of mind is achieved, actually, as a typo there, is achieved, to start self-investigation. Rather, purification to a reasonable extent should be enough to get started on self-investigation, because ultimately, absolute purification of mind can be achieved only by successful self-investigation. And this is an important point, which Robert, brought this up repeatedly, when we were discussing this yesterday. So because absolute purification of mind can be achieved only by successful self-investigation. So we do not need to wait till complete purification of mind is achieved. So all we need is, as long as it's reasonably purified, we plunge in and get started on our practice of self-investigation or Atma Vichara. When I was discussing this while ago with Murugan, just jotted this down on quickly as a diagram to discuss this point. And so once we get a reasonable degree of purity of mind, we just get started on self-investigation, which increases the purity of mind further. And that in turn helps us or propels us to practice more and more of Atma Vichara. And we get into this positive loop. Here, do you want to make any additional comments, Robert?
Yeah. When we say purity, it's not saying pure, impure in that sense. Purity is just the tendency of the mind not to wander and to stay focused on. So if we start getting into issues of purity, we get into moral issues of what's good and what's bad. Right. Are we doing it well or are we doing it badly?
Not that purity we're talking about, yeah.
But the purity simply means the remaining focused on self-awareness, so that when the mind wanders off, we see it wandering and we pull it back, which we gradually become more and more centered in self-awareness. And that centering in awareness of your own being is the purity. It's not, we're not looking at moral issues of this is bad, this is good. If we start doing that, then we'll get into a whole morass and moral dilemmas about whether what we're doing is right or wrong. So this purity is actually a focus on self-awareness away from the ego, which draws us outwards towards other things.
Right. So it's a broader term, right? So the purity of mind is basically means our the lesser inclination to attend to things other than ourselves.
And
so
what we call
also, but it's much more broader than that, right? It's much broader than that. So it's attending the less and less we have an inclination to attend to things other than ourselves. That means our mind is more and more pure. Does that capture what you're trying to say?
Yes,
so
yes.
Yeah. So now let's look at another question that comes up is, then how can we identify if we have a reasonable degree of purity of mind to get started on self-investigation, right? So that's the next question that comes up. Okay, you're saying if it's reasonably pure, I can get started, but how do I know it is reasonably pure that I'm ready? But this is an important question, right? People, a lot of times, here I'm Houston, we run the satsang for almost 10 years now. There are so many people I walk into, you say, oh, Ramana Maharshi, so you all are running Ramana Center. Ramana is great, but I don't want to come because I don't think I'm ready. I'm not there yet. So this is one of the common responses I get. But actually, more people are actually ready than they really think they are. So let's look at Michael's response here. Robert, you want to read this, please?
Yes, sir. Therefore, what is the indication that we have acquired the required degree of citta shuddhi, purity of mind, to begin practicing atma vichara? If we have a liking to try to practice it, that itself is sufficient proof that we have already gained the required degree of citta shuddhi. As I was mentioning to Kumar, prior to this, that, and also Michael mentioned it in his talk last week, the more we practice self-investigation, often the harder it gets, the more difficult it is to hold on to self-attention. And we think, oh, well, we're not making any progress because this is just getting harder. But Michael's point was that the more we lose the superficial impurities, as it were, we get deeper and deeper. In a way, it's like the subconscious. In a way, you're being your own psychiatrist, because by holding on to self-attention, you're allowing the contents of subconscious to come into consciousness and be, as it were, purified in the light of your being. So gradually these things rise. And as Bhagavan said, it's like killing the enemy coming out of the fortress, all the enemy thoughts. Each time that you hold on to your being and do not give power to the thought, you kill one more enemy. And these things are rising all the time. But it can be a very, very painful process. And the only way, really, that you can judge that you are making progress is the fact that you want to keep on doing it in spite of the hardships. Obviously, there'll be times when you may get as high as a kite for a couple of hours, but don't believe that's going to get you anywhere, because the next day you'll be back in the pit. So the key thing is to judge your progress is whether you get up in the morning and saying, I'm going to try even harder today to hold on to my self-attention. If you've got that feeling, then you're making progress, in my opinion.
Right. Thank you. Going back to the Neṟi 30, to sum this up, what Muruganar is saying is the first lesson that the true sadhakas must learn is to conduct themselves with a firm resolve to maintain the purity of heart. So obviously they have some purity of heart. That's why they are a sadhaka to begin with, right? That's why they got into this journey. But then they have to have that firm resolve, to maintain it. Another thing that really struck me here in this Neṟi is the Muruganar used the word, the first lesson, the most important lesson. That you cannot, you just don't want to give up. You got to have the firm resolve to maintain the purity of the heart that propelled you into this to begin with.
Also, you might say that people think the first lesson is to carry out certain pujas and kriyas and things and get those perfect before they start thinking about purity. But the purity should be the first thing you think about, not the things that might possibly lead to it if you practice breath control kriyas, puja, and so on for a long period. So the first lesson in all sadhana is this idea of purity and maintaining a focus upon the task, which is to realize the self.
Exactly. This is sort of the gist of here, what Bhagavan talks about in Upadesa Undiyar verses 4 through 8. And then in those verses, he actually arranges, he discusses purification of mind, and he talks about the different practices that are helping in purification of the mind. And he also arranges it in the order of efficacy. We can probably discuss that in detail at a later session. He basically says that japa is more effective than puja, and dhyana is more effective than chepa. And finally, in verse 8, he concludes that self-investigation or atma vichara, he uses the word ananya bhava, is more effective than any of the other methods in purifying the mind. And that's what we discussed this here today in detail. So does anyone have any questions on this?
Yeah, can I make a comment?
Yes, sure.
Yeah, early on, we saw that attachment to Vishaya, that is things outside, pleasures and happenings outside. The less we attach ourselves to the Vishayas, then the mind gets purified. Right? Generally in the Vedantic scriptures also, the first requirement for sadhaka is vivekam. What is vivekam is the discrimination, like what's real and what's unreal. So first of all, to realize that the pleasures outside or anything outside is unreal, unstable, and therefore not dependable. And so to train your mind to detach yourself from unreal, and to know what is real. Self-realization is the real, to get to 100%, or the real pleasure comes in self-realization. That is the vivekam, the discrimination between what's outside and what can be achieved by going inside. And then the next one is automatically vairagyam, which is to detach yourself from, once you have understood it intellectually as a necessity, then vairagyam is the actual practice of withdrawing yourself from the external objects as much as possible. So people going to forests and other things are, external maneuvers, to accomplish that, but you don't have to. So if you can mentally be strong enough to withdraw yourself from, early on, Kumar, you mentioned about some of the disciplines like, cutting our, spending time on watching TV, etc. All those things are part and parcel of your vivekam and vairagyam being, the first two. And then automatically, then there are several other specific steps, that are prescribed to accomplish more purity of mind, which will be, like shama, dhamma, pranayama, pratyahara, and so on. So the yogic, the Raja Yoga, Patanjali Sutra, way where you can control your breath and then withdraw from things and be steady in dhyana, etc., etc. So this is very similar to what's being said here, but some theoretical knowledge of, especially the uncertainty of things outside, which actually stares at us at all times. We see, for example, people dying, so commonly, but the vivekam, the actual sinking of that fact into your mind, should be so strong that it helps to go inward.
Exactly. As I said, there are other purification methods. we can start with that. But then the moment you get even a little bit of attraction to self-attention, that's it. That means you're ready. That is a key point they wanted to convey.
Yeah, that's
the moment you do not want to wait, you do not want to waste time on all the other practices. They are all good practices. But the moment you have an inclination to come to Ramana Center, anywhere in the world, or the moment you take a book and you're practicing Bhagavan's teaching, that means you are ready. You should start pursuing attention. So that's the hallmark of assessing, that whether you're ready or not. And that's one of the key points we wanted to drive today. Yes, yeah.
I think it's kind of interesting, that it's mentioned that it's the very first lesson and is this purity of heart. And I think it's not a coincidence. This is, I think, a very universal thing. And in the spiritual pursuit, you cannot, have an impure heart and still want to do this. The two cannot, to be very worldly and then still say, I wish to pursue being spiritual and go out. The two are not, they cannot occupy the same space. So this is why I think, like, Anant said, in yoga, the very first limb in Ashtanga yoga is, yamaniya. Or sorry, it's, your moral ethics. That's the very first thing you start with. They said, if you don't do this, you're doing, like, it's not 8-limb yoga, it's handicapped yoga. If you leave out the first one, if you're just focusing on the pranayama and everything. So in Christianity, they say, blessed are the pure of heart, for they shall see God. This is paraphrasing, of course, but this is the very first place that you start with, right? This is where you're building your foundation for your spiritual practice. So if your heart is impure, if you're still attached to worldly things, if you're still desirous of that which is going on, again, that's number one thing that is an obstacle, like you said, to people saying, like, that's very funny, by the way, that people said, I don't feel I'm ready. Reminds me of the time that somebody came to Bhagavan and said, I don't believe that I'm qualified to study non-dualism or Vedanta. And, he said, very famous, I'm sure everybody knows the story. He said, did you just say I? Then you were qualified. Kind of that's the...
Right.
But it cannot be overstated. I think we just, because we're in this group and we talk about it so much, we kind of take it for granted. But this is really, what you're building your whole spiritual practice on is if you a temple on shifting sand will slowly crumble. So that way, if you have an impure heart and you're still trying to do this, it will not work, right?
So that is, it touched a broad perspective on this. And it's been an issue, but right from Bhagavan's times, that the people not having that confidence. So first is a pure mind is necessary, and that's what brings them to Bhagavan to begin with, whether when he was in the body or now. And that's what brings them to Bhagavan. And once they are brought to Bhagavan, that means they're ready. And then they should just continue to pursue that. That means they're pure enough, and they should continue to pursue self-investigation, and continue to maintain the purity of mind, which brought them to Bhagavan to begin with.